Let's watch the Freddy Krueger one, and then if we're still feeling it, we'll watch this one about Marvel.
When I go to the movies, it's almost always to see a horror film. These are movies that both...
By the way, if you haven't already, I'm going to put this in the chat real quick. Check out my YouTube archive. It's where I put all my past streams, and I have a bunch of playlists by discussion topic, and I have highlights, so if you don't want to take the time to watch a whole stream, I cut it all up into little shorter bits. So, check that out if you get the chance. The quartering sounds good. Oh, that's me. Shut up, me. It's my turn to talk.
Both my wife and I truly love. They are one of the pure, untouched genres of all time in cinema. I prefer ones that are more...
What does that mean? Pure, untouched genres of cinema. That's a lot of words that mean nothing when put together in that specific order.
How do you say? Suspense-laden and more of a thriller. Even, I just recently watched, 13 Cameras and then 14 Cameras. Those were very good, I thought. Low budget, but excellent thrillers / horror films. There's a lot of movies. It Follows, I thought, was really good. Hollywood has put out a lot of good new franchise thrillers or horror films, but they've also put out an absolute pile of garbage ones, including trying to reprise old films and get us to go back. Now, it was a win with It. I thought It was quite good, definitely.
In fairness, the original Stephen King It miniseries sucks, so there was nowhere to go but up there. I mean, like... I know people have nostalgia for that, and Tim Curry's like a really fun Pennywise, but the It miniseries sucks, like a lot. Have you watched it lately? Sesshomaru with 50 bits. By pure and untouched, he means that they don't have the whamens and gays in them. Ah, of course. What a douche.
8 out of 10 in terms of horror film.
The Life of Mal says I like the miniseries. That's fine, you're allowed to have a different opinion than me. I just think it sucks. It's real bad. The parts with the kids are good, but the adults suck, and I hate them. And the whole spider thing. I know that's how... I know he turns into a spider in the book, but, like, the remakes, the more recent ones, deal with it in a better way, I think. I really, really liked the new It movies, actually, and I think whoever did those movies, I don't know who the director is or who the screenwriter is, but they need to do the Nightmare on Elm Street reboot. Because it involves a lot of, like, you know, he's using people's fear to get to them, and that's basically what Freddy Krueger does anyway, so I think that director should tackle Nightmare on Elm Street. The adult parts of the book suck, too. The kid part are just better overall. Yeah, probably. Doesn't Freddy 2 have, like, super high gay energy? Oh, yeah. Nightmare on Elm Street 2 is, like, the gayest horror movie ever made, if you've seen it. It's crazy. They literally go to, like, a leather daddy bar.
Films and, you know.
I think I made a joke about this at one point. Hold on. Nightmare on Elm Street 2. Dance. Here's the scene from Nightmare on Elm Street 2. It's a pretty gay movie, in all the best ways. We're gonna get to the actual... Not that dancing in and of itself is gay, but, I don't know. It's, you'll see. You'll see. It's about it, yeah, it's symbolically about a guy fighting, like, his gay urges, basically, yeah. And the main actor is a gay man, yes. Subtle! Yeah, talking about the gay Nightmare on Elm Street movie. Anyway, so that's that. Check out Nightmare on Elm Street 2 if you haven't seen it. It's my least favorite of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies because it doesn't even feel like a Nightmare on Elm Street movie. Freddy comes into the real world and kills people. It's very strange. But check it out nonetheless. It's an interesting little piece of cinema history.
You know, considering it was a reboot, my expectations were exceeded. But there are absolutely a large percentage of the newer renditions of old franchises that are just terrible. I think the Halloween franchise does okay. Most of the latest...
I really liked the Halloween movie that came out like a year and a half, 2 years ago. That was just called Halloween with Jamie Lee Curtis. I thought that was a really good, like, reboot. Sort of reboot. I don't know what you would call it. Because it ignored all the movies other than the first one. But it was cool. I liked that one. What about Freddy vs. Jason? I like Freddy vs. Jason as a versus movie. If you don't know who Freddy or Jason are, it's a terrible fucking movie. But who's gonna watch Freddy vs. Jason if you don't know who they are? It's a fun movie if you're just there to watch the two fight. It's like terribly early 2000s, but that kind of adds to the charm in my opinion. It's like a love letter to 80s slashers from a firmly early 2000s viewpoint. It's interesting, and the fights are cool. I think the director usually did martial arts movies, so the fights were all done quite well, although there is sort of a weird frame skip effect that they do in the movie multiple times that I think doesn't work very well. But
Jason movies, just terrible. Now, Freddy Krueger...
Edge Grinder says, I wish they did a sequel to Freddy vs. Jason with Ash Williams from Evil Dead. They actually did write that script. It was going to be Freddy vs. Jason versus Ash, but the budget would have just been ridiculous. But they did turn that screenplay into a comic book, so if you're interested in to see what that movie would have been like, the comic does exist.
Though, is one of the few truly still terrifying characters in horror films. But apparently, it's time to get woke. Before I get into that, absolutely huge sponsor, or shout out to this video sponsor, Displate. This video's sponsor is Displate. They're high quality prints on metal. They come in matte finish like this, gloss finish like some of the ones you see behind me. I've been swapping them in, swapping them out on my set. Hope you're enjoying that. They mount on the wall super easy using magnets, which allow you to move them around or create collage. Up into 3 displays and full Star Wars. You wall. Oh, deal only goes through the weekend. Get yourself some sweet horror themed or video game themed displays and support your walls with some sweet art and support the channel. By the way, if you haven't subscribed yet, there's a little red button right down below the video. Hopefully today will be the day you do. Now, a new article coming out via Bounding Into Comics says Robert Englund claims the next Freddy film should toy with a kid's sexuality and have a focus on the opioid crisis. What?
First of all, the second Nightmare on Elm Street did already deal with a kid's sexuality. That was a thing that already happened, Jeremy. And when he says kid, he doesn't mean a child. He means like a teenager. Dude, all the films had some element of sexuality. The first movie has a sex scene between Rod and Tina, and then afterward they're sleeping in the bed. That's when they do the, like, turn the room around and she's getting dragged all over the ceiling. Like, sexuality is a huge part of slasher movies, and it always has been. In terms of focusing on the opioid crisis, I have no idea what Robert Englund is talking about there, and how that would play into the movie. But again, Robert Englund plays Freddy Krueger. He's not the creative mind behind it, right? So taking anything that he says as like, this is the plan for the next movie is silly. No?
What? No! No, 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 no. 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 No.
The third movie did have a drug-addicted kid, and then Freddy's glove turns into, like, a needle thing and shoots it into her arm.
No.
Jeremy, have you seen the Nightmare on Elm Street movies? These things have already been in the Nightmare on Elm Street movies.
Freddy Krueger actor Robert Englund recently revealed, it's like these people get a list of talking points every morning, and that's what they talk about.
It's Robert Englund. Has he even acted in the past, like, 10 years? Jeremy, what are you talking about? He's not, like, some big celebrity. Robert Englund. Let's see his IMDb. I genuinely don't know what he's done in the past, like, decade. Harvest Moon, Commune, J.J. Villard's Fairy Tales, Spy Kids Mission Critical, The Goldbergs he was in, as Mr. Knifey Hands. Okay. Uncle Grandpa, he was the voice of Scarecrow in Injustice 2. That's a fitting cast. But he's been in nothing big. He's not really been in anything big. It looks like he's done a lot of voice work. So, out of all the people you could claim are in, like, woke politics or whatever, I wouldn't go to Robert Englund. Jeremy. Very strange choice. Toween24 says in the later movies there's Hypnosil, a drug that suppresses dreams. Might have something to do with that. Maybe. Hypnosil is mentioned in Nightmare on Elm Street 3 and Freddy vs. Jason. I don't know if it's mentioned in any of the other ones.
You know? Freddy Krueger actor Robert Englund recently revealed a number of ideas where the Freddy franchise could go, with one of them being a remake of a Nightmare on Elm Street 2 where Freddy toys with a boy's sexuality.
Yeah, Jeremy, that was already a thing that happened in Nightmare on Elm Street 2. The second one in the franchise.
Englund, who last played Freddy on the big screen in 2003's Freddy vs. Jason, which was awful, by the way, spoke with 2Fab about the Freddy franchise and revealed some of his ideas for the franchise. In their discussion about Freddy, 2Fab asked what the disconnect between modern audiences and old-school 1980s horror film was. Nothing!
Jeremy, neither you nor I can talk about, like, what the youths like, because I'm 26. I'm not super old, but I'm certainly not a Gen Z person who, like, is really on the pulse of America's pop culture, right? And Jeremy, you're like 40? So, of course, you don't see any disconnect between 80s slashers. You were, like, around when they were new. So, maybe don't assume that you know what America's youths connect with. I don't even claim to do that, and I'm much younger than you.
Nothing. If you like horror films, then you should be watching exclusively horror films made in the 80s.
Imagine if this same thing played out, but like 20, 30 years earlier, and someone was like, hold on, let me get, these are the Bones glasses, but I'm gonna use it for something else. Actually, all you, children watching these disgusting, slasher movies, if you don't like, the works of Alfred Hitchcock, if you haven't seen, Vertigo 37 times, then you are not a true horror fan. Like, Jeremy, times change. Things that were pop cultural staples in the past, the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, the Friday the 13th movies, the Halloween movies. If kids these days don't connect with that, which I think a lot of them still probably do, they're still, you know, famous movies, but, I mean, get a kid to watch Halloween, that movie's boring as fuck to a kid today, I'd imagine. But that's not a fault of the children, right? It's just how culture works. It moves forward, and things change. Like, I'm not a big fan of a bunch of movies from the 30s or 40s or 50s. There are some classics that, of course, endure, like the Wizard of Oz, which was made in the 30s. Of course, like Psycho and stuff like that. But, like, your average horror movie that was popular before you or I were born, we don't necessarily watch those. Like, slasher movies were big when we were younger, but, like, they're not the new hotness. I think supernatural horror films are pretty popular now, which is a little bit more similar to how it was before we were born, when there were, like, the, the old dark house type movies, where you'd have, like, oh, there's a house on that hill and it's got ghosts in it, and people would go and, stay in the house or whatever. Like The Haunting. Like the movie The Haunting and stuff like that. So, genres change over time, and that's okay. No one is beholden to that which came before. If you don't like Nightmare on Elm Street for some reason, that's fine. I like it, but you don't have to. People have different tastes. They grow up in different worlds, and that's okay.
That was a golden era for horror and suspense.
Jeremy, are you saying that specifically because you were raised in a time when those were held up as the pinnacle of, like, modern horror? Because it seems like that's probably the case. Everyone thinks that, like, their era's popular movies are the movies, and everything that came before is boring, and everything that came after is like, oh, this is new trash. This is a thing. Everyone thinks this about the pop culture from their generation. It's fine. It's fine that things change. There's nothing wrong with that. There's no such thing as an objectively better movie than another movie. We can talk about the things that we think are better or worse than them, and there could be general opinions shared by huge swaths of the population, but that doesn't mean one is objectively better, and of course, new generations are always going to come around and have their own opinion on things, and that is fine. That's fine. You know what happens when people focus on one era and say that the movies or books or whatever from there are the best and everything new is trash? That's stagnation. That's cultural stagnation, and it's bad.
Pinhead, Michael Myers.
Am I excited for Scream 5? Are they doing a Scream 5 officially? I really like the Scream movies. The only one I didn't really like was the third one, but 4 was pretty good. Although Wes Craven's dead now, so I guess we'll see how it goes. Session Maru with 50 bits. I'm honestly baffled that the Scooby-Doo live-action movie has become the cult classic of my generation, but here we are. Scooby-Doo 2, Monsters Unleashed, is okay. The first one's not that good, though, in my opinion.
Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees, these characters were born in that era.
Imagine, this would be like if some older man, came up to Jeremy and he's like, "You like your Freddy Krueger? You gotta go watch The Mummy. You gotta go watch Dracula. Bela Lugosi knew how to scare the kids. Oh, I don't drink wine." Like, Jeremy, just like you and I don't find Dracula scary, or The Mummy scary, or The Wolfman scary, it's entirely possible kids these days don't find Freddy Krueger scary, or Jason scary, or Michael Myers scary. It's fine. It's fine. That's the way of things. That's progress. People don't find things as scary as they once did.
And there's still nothing scarier. Like, legitimately, there's nothing scarier than that stuff.
There's nothing scarier than that. Look, I like the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, but they're not fucking scary. Maybe this is even the age difference between Jeremy and I. I love the Nightmare on Elm Street movies. I love the Friday the 13th movies, but they're not scary. Not really, right? They're like fun slasher movies. I don't watch a slasher movie to be scared. I watch it for the fun, creative kills, or like because of the personality of the killer in the case of Freddy Krueger. Like, I admit that the first Nightmare on Elm Street movie is probably the best one. I mean, Wes Craven made it. It's like a great piece of horror history, and it's well-paced, well-made horror. But I still don't find it that scary, right? I like the later ones where it gets schlocky and silly and Freddy's using the word bitch in every sentence. Because it's fun. They're fun little, like, you know, fantasy horror movies. I like that.
To do with culture, he answered. Well, I think they're so part of the culture now that they have to they've been diluted a little bit, he elaborated. That's reasonable. And also, I think that remakes were rushed. Also agreed. I know the remake of A Nightmare on Elm Street was premature. He continued. We should have done another Freddy vs. Jason film. No.
Yes, that would have been excellent. I wish you had. Please, yes. Jeremy, what are you talking about? Freddy vs. Jason. Fucking fantastic. How dare you?
No. And then waited.
Fuck it. They should have done Freddy vs. Jason vs. Michael and done that. That would have been good.
They should have waited 5 or 10 years, and I think the same thing with Child's Play. Also agreed. Child's Play was a disaster.
It was okay. I'm fine with Child's Play, the remake, specifically because it's not like they were doing the Charles Lee Ray thing again, and it was just like another that. It wasn't a good movie, but, like, it's a different movie, right? It's basically like a little robot comes to life and tries to kill people. It's at least different. I'll give them points for not trying to do the exact same thing, even if it does have the Child's Play coat of paint on it, you know?
Remake. I think they're so a part of culture that they're being rerun so much and they're available on DVD. The horror master will go on to point out that he felt was part of the secret sauce of Nightmare's success was when it was first introduced, that they also have to recognize what the secret of Nightmare on Elm Street is the loss of innocence, and the kids need to be like Midwestern kids. They can't be hip, chic, junkie kids. He elaborated. They have to be middle American kids that think they're a little hip, that they are co-opted by evil, and they lose their innocence on all levels. But then, details of the new Freddy film would have to focus on today's society. Nope.
Jeremy's mad that society is different when he grew up. Jeremy says no. Films should pretend it's the 90s when I grew up. Jeremy, that's not how movies work. That's not how anything works. Time moves on, friendo. Embrace it. Embrace our oldness. It's only gonna get older, right? I'm as young today as I will ever be. Deal with it.
I don't want to see Freddy Krueger invading TikTok. Nobody wants to see that. This is such a disconnected... You want to talk about disconnect, okay? This is the ultimate disconnect.
Jeremy, you're a 40-year-old man with toys in his background. And again, I like me some toys. But Jeremy, you can't be a 40-year-old man on YouTube and pretend that you know what the youth of America wants. This is effectively like your armchair coaching in the same way that CEOs do. Like, what are the kids into these days? They like them the TikToks and the Fortnite dances. Like, Jeremy, I don't know what Gen Z finds entertaining in the horror films, and it's not my business to try and dictate that to them, right? Like, who cares? Jeez.
You want to talk about Hollywood not understanding what people want from horror? Just look at the innumerable flops that came out in the last 10 years. The innumerable remakes that were just awful.
Okay, let's see what the top horror films in the last decade have been. This isn't necessarily going to be entirely, representative of, like, Gen Z, but we'll take a look. Top horror films last decade. Let's see, we have... That's the best horror films. I'm looking for, like, highest grossing. Highest... It's going to be a lot of Paranormal Activities. Horror... Highest grossing horror films of the last decade. It Chapter 2, So we have a supernatural horror film that involves a coming-of-age story, and also, like, deeper themes of, like, childhood, loss of innocence, stuff that Robert Englund is talking about. And it, in fact, also includes a supernatural entity that preys on people's fears, much like Freddy Krueger. Get Out, which of course was fantastic, and Jordan Peele's directorial debut, involved heavy use of modern social issues, which of course Jeremy is against. We have Halloween, a remake of an 80s slasher film, but with things like cell phones and modern kids doing modern things. So the top 3 highest grossing horror films of the 2010s all involve things that Jeremy is directly saying kids these days don't want. Jeremy, have you considered that you're out of touch with the youth of America, being a man in his 40s? Again, I'm only 26. I don't even think I have my finger on the pulse of the youth of America. So why do you think you, as a 40-year-old man, knows what the fuck kids want? It's very strange. I think Jeremy doesn't realize how old he is. Weirdly. Halloween is a sequel, not a remake. It's not a remake, but I'd say it's a reboot. It's bringing the franchise back, you know? The highest grossing... Oh wow, Ghostbusters 2016 is on the list. That's surprising. Shutter Island, that was 2010 though. And The Nun, which is the spin-off of the Conjuring movies. Supernatural films, especially dealing with like ghosts and stuff, have been really popular the past 10 years. The Conjuring series, the Conjuring movies are really good, by the way. I'm not a fan of Annabelle, and I haven't seen The Nun or The Curse of La Llorona, but the Conjuring movies themselves are quite good, if you haven't seen them. Anyway, I wouldn't mind if we had to switch back to sort of slasher movies, though I don't expect them to be the same as 80s slasher movies, because it hasn't been the 80s for 40 years, Jeremy! This face says everything, I think, Jeremy. He's just an old man who's mad the world continues to change around him, trying to surround himself with toys of the past in order to sate his need for nostalgia. Like, dude, things change. Pop culture almost always centers itself on youth, because youth control the narrative, more or less, in terms of pop culture. They have a lot of disposable income. They're the ones that go and see movies with their friend every weekend or whatever, you know? Just saying.
Hollywood doesn't know how to make... United States Hollywood, I should say, doesn't know how...
That's the only Hollywood there is, Jeremy? The one in the United States? When it's not in the United States, we don't call it Hollywood. Like in India, we call it Bollywood. Or we just call it, like, you know, China's motion picture industry. Hollywood is you know, I know what you mean, but...
How to make good horror films anymore. All they can do is go back to the well. And don't give me that Jordan Peele's films were good. They were grossly overrated.
I disagree. Again, Jeremy, you're free to not like them. That's fine. But you can't pretend that your opinion is the prevailing opinion. It's not. Get Out's one of the highest grossing horror movies of all time. And fewer people liked the movie Us, but I liked Us better than Get Out, right? So, like, you're free to have your own opinion, but to act like your out-of-touch 40-year-old view of what a horror movie should be is the prevailing opinion is so out of touch, I don't really know what to say. NB Gamer, thank you for continuing your subscription. And NB Gamer says, trans rights. Fuck yeah, trans rights.
Get Out, okay, above average film. His sophomore film, terrible. Terrible.
See, that's surprising to me. And I've heard this from other people too, that they didn't like Us as much as Get Out. I liked Us so much better. And I liked Get Out. I just really loved Us. I don't know why. I'm curious why.
And I'm sure he's going to completely botch Candyman as well.
Why? Why are you sure of that? I think Candyman looks good. What?
He explained, because our society is now more damaged because of the opioid crisis. Because of the incredible diverse... those kids now have to be different than the kids from the original Nightmare, and someone has to write a different batch of kids, and Freddy needs to be different kind of evil. He added, evil needs to be, he needs to toy with what they like in the culture. So
I don't disagree. I could, for instance, see, let's say they did a Nightmare on Elm Street movie. This would be really bold. This would be ballsy, but I think it could be done well, as long as you get input from actual, like, a trans person and have perhaps an actual, you know, young trans woman actress, or trans man if they decide to go that route. But basically have a trans character who, you know, trans issues are a big thing that people talk about, and then have Freddy's, like, dream nightmare scenario that they put them in, as Freddy always does in these movies, basically be dysphoria. Like, have Freddy in the dream make that person, let's say they're a trans woman, have them appear as a man, doing, like, manly things, and, like, they hate that. And I know this is, like, but I think if it's done well, it could really, really illustrate to people, like, how uncomfortable being transgender can be, and, like, the dysphoria involved. Because if Freddy came across a trans individual, he would absolutely play with that, because he's a fucker. That's what he does. He preys on people's insecurities and their fears. And what would be, like, a bigger fear to a trans person than not being viewed as the person that they are, or being taken advantage because of that fact? So I think that could be interesting. Towing24, Jeremy doesn't like it because black people. Yeah, of course. So I don't know. It'd be real easy to get that wrong, but if you could get a Freddy thing with, like, a trans character right, I think it could work pretty well.
Like, Freddy Krueger will now come in the form of cancel culture?
Jeremy, cancel culture doesn't exist.
Is that what it is? Like, hey, kids, looks like you sent out a spicy tweet while you were asleep.
Jeremy considers using the N-word being spicy. No, friendo. That's not spicy. That's fucked up.
And then just dance off into the closet and watch a little kid freak out because they've been canceled on Twitter. Is that what the new Freddy Krueger needs to be? If they redid Nightmare 2, for instance, the real deal with the subtext, Freddy toying with that boy's sexuality. What?
Jeremy, you said you're a fan of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies. You must have seen the second one. It's barely subtext. Nightmare on Elm Street 2 involved, like, it couldn't be any more blatant. They've taken subtext in that movie in terms of the kid's, like, homosexuality and him struggling with it, and it's basically just text, right? Like, Jeremy, have you seen the movie? They go to a leather daddy bar, and then and he gets, like, spanked with, like, gym equipment. Like, it's so strange that you would watch that movie and not understand the basic themes.
What? But the fact that we're so much more comfortable with that now, I think that it would be really fun to have Freddy's play with one kid who's gay, and maybe one who's not. Play with them, tempt them, force them out of the closet, and then back into the closet. We can do that, he elaborated. Nobody wants to see that movie.
I'd want to see that movie. Jeremy, maybe you should check and see how old you are before you decide what other people want, right? Like, nah, bro. Nah.
Nobody. Robert Englund, I respect what you've done, but this is a garbage take. Englund claims audiences would be accepting of this idea, but in order to really pull it off, you would need someone clever, he started. audiences would accept that now. Freddy would have to do it because he's in your head, because it's going to take somebody very clever to do that. The next idea, he said, would look at the drug elements of Nightmare on Elm Street 3. He detailed, again, you look at Nightmare 3, a fan favorite. By the way, yeah, it is probably the best one. Dream Warriors. You want to take that to the place where they meet some kind of kids who are in rehab. You have to push those things a little further. Whatever their problems are, really have fun with one of the kids being OCD and Freddy having to exploit that. I think one would be because it's 2020 now, he elaborated.
OCD would be pretty good. Have a kid with OCD and then, like, put them in a dream scenario where it's, like, disgusting. That'd be pretty good. I could see that. That's like that's the Nightmare on Elm Street movie. The first act is setting up where the kids are, whether it be at a school or they're, in an insane asylum or wherever, and basically their personalities and their neuroses, whatever the thing is Freddy's going to prey upon. Second act is Freddy killing off most of the cast, using the things we learned about them in Act 1. Act 3 is whichever person is the survivor, figuring out how to pull Freddy out of a dream in order to kill him by the end of the movie. So, yeah, I could see OCD kid being like a Freddy thing.
Then detailed that the film could include an autistic actor. Get an autistic actor.
Sure.
And really play with how Freddy would torment him. No, this sounds terrible.
Jeremy, why do you think your opinion is the prevailing one that would matter here? And also, what would you do? Let's say you're in charge of a Freddy Krueger movie. They're gonna make Nightmare on Elm Street 9 or whatever it would be. They went to, I think, was the 5, and then Freddy's Dead, and then New Nightmare 7. So this would be, I think, Nightmare on Elm Street 8. Let's say they do Nightmare on Elm Street 8, or they'll probably just call it Nightmare on Elm Street, based on the fact that seems to be the trend when they do, like, continuations, but kind of reboots. They just call it, the first one again. So let's say they make Nightmare on Elm Street. What do you do in terms of the kids' whatever qualities that Freddy's going to prey upon? It makes sense to do things that you couldn't have done in the past, right? You've already covered most of that stuff. They already covered eating disorders in part 5. They covered, comic books in part 5 as well. They covered someone falling asleep while driving in part 4, I want to say. No, that was part 5, I think, too. They covered, someone who's like a weightlifter and they're afraid of bugs. So that's 2 things crossed off the list. They've covered, I'm trying to think of all the dream sequences. Someone who's into martial arts. They've covered like a nerdy girl with asthma. They've covered a whole bunch. They did video games, yeah. They did someone who's deaf. They did someone who had been abused by their father sexually. They've covered tons of stuff, right? Like, all the big ones you could think of in terms of Freddy taking advantage of someone's fears, they've done it. It's been done. They've done Stoner Kid and Freddy vs. Jason. All this stuff's been done. So what are you gonna do, Jeremy?
Rob, this sounds awful. Awful.
Arcana Stamper Blackwell says, all these ideas actually sound pretty good. He's so angry the world has grown since the 70s, 80s. Yeah, that's his entire personality, is being mad that the world isn't the same as it was, like, the year he was born. It's very strange.
And by the way, you think people would accept that nowadays? You're wrong. You're wrong.
Jeremy, you're literally not accepting it. You're proving him right. You're proving him right!
It's clear that in Englund's view, if the franchise is to move forward with or without him, it has to keep up with what he believes will connect with modern audiences.
I wouldn't mind if they did like a Nightmare on Elm Street one last one with him, although he's pretty old, so I don't know how spry he is. But then again, they can do a lot of stuff with special effects. But yeah, if they're gonna reboot Nightmare on Elm Street, it wouldn't be a bad idea to recast. I think, the recast they did with the reboot they tried in 2010 was quite bad. Like, I know he's a good actor. It's the guy who played Rorschach and Watchmen. Like, he can act, but he was a bad call for Freddy. You need someone who can both be scary and, like, funny. It's kind of a fine line.
No. Fear. Terror. These are things that are in the id of our brain. They are the most primal emotions.
Jeremy, do you think with people with autism don't face fears in regard to that autism? Do you think people who are gay or trans don't face fears in regard to their identities and how society views them? Just because they aren't fears you personally have because you're like a straight white dude who's neurotypical doesn't mean those aren't fears other people deal with. Like, have a shred of empathy and understand that other people are feeling these things, and then it'll be scary to you. I don't know why it's impossible for you to empathize with the positions of others, but here we are.
Can have. And it has nothing to do with TikTok. It's just, yes, you can modernize it, but could you imagine Freddy Krueger putting out, like, getting on someone's, like, Twitter feed and making a spicy joke?
Jeremy, at no point in this did he say anything about Twitter. All he said was, like, hey, we should include, like, more gay characters or someone with autism. Like, that's fine. At no point did he make a comment about, like, Fortnite dances or TikTok. You're reading into this all your negative opinions and things that come to mind about Gen Z, like, without anyone else bringing those things up. You're such an old man on your lawn screaming at a cloud. I can't even believe it.
What?
Highly and Derp says, by the way, Hannah, in general, people prefer to be called autistic people rather than people with autism. Sorry. Didn't know that.
Nobody wants to see that. Now, the Craven Estate is currently accepting pitches, though there is no word if they will move forward on a new project with this IP.
I think whoever did it should definitely put in a proposal, because I think they are really great.
Hear from you. What do you think of Robert Englund said? Well, he's an idiot. No, I'm not going to say that. Robert Englund has earned his place at the table, obviously, to talk about this, especially this franchise. But this is just a very, very bad take. I'm looking forward to seeing your comments in the comment section down below. We'll talk to you again real soon.
Oh, Jeremy, please stop being such an old man screaming at the heavens. Like, you're just gonna get older and less connected to what the youth of America like, Jeremy. I'm doing the same. I'm not that far behind you. It's how the world works. Not so great for someone who runs a pop culture channel, though, right? Although, who knows? Maybe years from now we'll see Jeremy in a retirement home screaming with his fellow old people about stuff, and they'll also be on YouTube. I don't know.